Hello and welcome to mDebug tutorial video. In this video we'll go over how to deploy and use this debugging microservice. If you're just starting out with edgeEngine and want to follow along, I highly suggest you watch Get Started with macOS video first. In that video we build our environment from scratch on macOS computer. The link to that video will be in the description. Now let's get going with mDebug. mDebug is a microservice that can be deployed on any device running edgeEngine. It's a utility microservice that allows developers to look into edge clusters and extract information. Developers can see the devices that are in that cluster and view device attributes, characteristics, and capabilities, and also list of microservices that exist on the device. Since this debugging tool lets you look into edge clusters, it's important we have some knowledge on what these clusters are. When edgeEngine is started and associated on any particular device, it can fall into one or more of these three categories of clusters based on ownership. One is account cluster, the other being proximity cluster, and the other being network cluster. Let's first look at account cluster. When a device physically belongs to you and is associated with your account, regardless of location and network that it uses, this device will fall into the account cluster. Now let's look at network cluster. When devices are on the same network, they fall into the network cluster. It's important to note that devices on the same network may or may not belong to you, meaning that it can be associated with any account. This means that devices that fall into the account cluster can fall into the network cluster as well, simultaneously. Lastly, we'll look at proximity cluster. When a device is in proximity based on location, it falls into the proximity cluster. Similar to the previous clusters, devices in proximity cluster may or may not belong to you or be on the same network as you. This means that devices that fall into the account cluster and or network cluster can fall into this cluster simultaneously as well. Now that we know a little bit about edge clusters, it's actually time to get down to deploying mDebug microservice and running it. But first we need a couple things going in our environment. So first we need to check that edgeEngine is running and is associated with our account. And we're going to use mimik edge CLI tool to do that. And in order to use mimik edge CLI tool, we need to have the edge access token, and we actually need the mDebug microservice itself, and you can get that from GitHub. So the link to the GitHub repository that has mDebug and some other documentation related to it will be in the description. So first we need to download and clone the mDebug microservice from GitHub. I have already done that and I've moved it into the mDebug folder, where I have my edge access token, the tar file for the microservice, and a start.json file. In the previous video, we actually had to clone, build, and deploy the microservice, the starter microservice. But with this microservice, since it's not open source, all we need to do is just deploy it because it's already built. So let's move on to that. So in order to build it, I need to go to where the microservice is deployed, where the microservice is saved in the folder, and I'm already here. So if I do an ls, I see that tar file here. So now we need to use mimik edge CLI to deploy the image. So what we need to do, we need to use mimik edge CLI image deploy, and we need to set the path to the image, and this is mDebug, which is right here, and we need to provide a token, so -t, and now we'll go into our edge access token here, and we'll just copy all the content in this file, and we'll come back into terminal and paste it. So we got a successful deployment of the image. Now we need to deploy the container using the start.json file here. So in order to do that, we need to do just make sure that these names are matching. So we have name mDebug v1, and in here we have mDebug v1, which is the same. All right, so we're good to go. So all we need to do now again is use mimik edge CLI container deploy. deploy dash payload. Payload is the start.json. And we need to provide a token. And we got a successful container deploy. So now we have this MCM base API path. So we'll use this MCM base API path to open the GUI via browser. Now that we have deployed the image and started the container, we can see that we have the MCM base API path here. So what we'll do is copy this, and we'll open up a browser. And in the browser, we'll open up a new tab, and we'll do localhost 8083, which is Edge, and we'll paste that endpoint that we copied, and we'll add a slash at the end, and we'll input GUI. And we arrive at the mDebug GUI here. So this is how you open up the mDebug GUI. Next, we'll take a look at all of the elements inside of this GUI and how to read the information that is given. Now that we have the graphical user interface open for mDebug, there's a couple things we need to do first before we can make the get nodes call. So first we will need the owner code. You can get the owner code from the deployment output when you started the container, and owner code should be right here. So we'll look for owner code here, and we see that it's 1234. We'll copy that, and we'll paste it into owner code here. Make sure there's no spaces, trailing and leading. And then we need to get our access token. So we can get the same access token we've been using with Mimic Edge CLI. I have mine here. I'll just copy all of it, and I'll paste it into access token here. Oh, I didn't copy it. Paste it into here. So now that we have both of these requirements filled out, we can make the get nodes call. So we'll follow the same order that we learned the clusters by. So we'll start by making the account call. We'll make this call, we'll press send, and we get a response. So just to clear things up a little bit, we'll close some of these responses, and we can count these items up. So we can see that we have 3 of these items. So this means we have 3 devices that belong to my account cluster, pretty much meaning that they belong to me. So we'll look at a couple of the devices. The first device here, we can see some information about it. We can see some address information. So we can see its IP address, and we can see some attributes about the device as well. We see the name of the device. We see information about its CPU, its edge information. We see that it's also a Windows operating system, and some other information. We can also see some of the services that are listed on here as well. And this Windows machine seems to also have mDebug as a microservice as well. Then we'll look at another device. So we'll go up here and we'll minimize this, and we'll open the next one. This is the device that I'm using right here. So this is its Edge version, that's the name of it, and it's the Mac OS, which is the Mac OS I'm on right now. And we see some services that it has here too. So it has mDebug, a couple other more services, SuperDrive, and the Hello World microservice, and another one, and some other information regarding that. And we can look at another one here. We'll just quickly go over it. This one is a Linux machine with a couple services as well. Now we'll move on to network. So we'll look at the devices that are on the same network as me, as the network that I'm on. So I'm connected to a network here. You see this Wi-Fi symbol. So we'll get all the devices that are connected to this Wi-Fi. So we'll press network, and we'll press send, and we'll minimize it to see how many devices we have. And in this instance, we have 4. So I think three of these devices are my own devices that you saw in network, and another one is another device that belongs to a different person. So let's see if we can find that device. So we had a Windows, a Mac, and a Linux. So we'll look at the first one to see which one this is. This is a MacBook, so this belongs to me. We've already seen this device. This one is the Windows, I believe. Yeah, it's the Windows. So this one also belongs to me. We'll look at this one. And this one's a Raspberry Pi. So we didn't see a Raspberry Pi in our account call. So this means that this device belongs to a different user, and it happens to be a Raspberry Pi. And it also has no services deployed onto it. So it's a fresh install of Edge. And the last one is probably the Linux that we had earlier. And that is true here. So now we'll go to the last one, which is proximity, and we'll look at all the devices that have been in proximity with me. So there should be a lot more devices in this call. So we'll go to nearby, and we'll press send, and we'll close some of the data, just so we can count how many devices there are. So already we have way more than we had in the other two clusters. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 devices that were in proximity of me. So let's see a couple of these devices. Let's look at this first one. It has a few less items. This happens to be a Mac, but we never saw this name before. Nope, this is actually, yeah, this is a Mac. So it belongs to a different person. Also doesn't have any services. We'll look at a different one here. Let's see what device this is. AMD Ryzen CPU. So this is also a different version, but it's another Windows. And it has a couple other, it has a lot of services deployed. So it has a CDN service, a TVA service, shadow feed, and a bunch of other services deployed onto it as well. So this is one of those devices. And we can take a look at one more. Let's see which one this is. This is the Windows device that we had. So a couple of these devices will be the same. So that wraps up Get Nodes. Let's recap what we just learned. With mDebug microservice, when you deploy it onto edgeEngine, you can query edgeEngine to return information about the devices that are in certain clusters. In our presentation, we looked at the devices that were in account cluster, proximity cluster, and network cluster. With mDebug, you can verify that all of the deployed microservices are running on the devices in your edge cluster. When we went through the information that was returned from edgeEngine, we saw that different devices had different sets of microservices. So you can use this tool to see if your microservices and your business logic are being deployed correctly onto the devices that you've chosen within your business logic. In the next video, we'll go over the 2 tabs you may have seen in the mDebug microservice graphical user interface that were getInfo and PutToken. In order to talk about the purpose of these 2 APIs, we'll need to go over the concepts of a supernode and its role in edge clusters. Thank you for watching. Catch you in the next video.